So like really think about where you put your time and where you want it to go, and if that gives you what you want out of it. There are some people who just love their teams so much that that's their thing, and that's okay if that's your thing. You just have to think, where am I going to get other time to work on whatever I want to work on? It's the same as a budget. I always tell people the exact same thing with your money. If you want that cable, that's fine, but maybe that means you cut going to Starbucks. Or maybe you want that coffee every day, but that means you get a used car instead of a new car. And there's all these decisions we have to make all the time with our time and our money. They're both limited resources. So to get the best use of it, never use the term "I'm killing time" or "I'm wasting time." Use your time. Put it to good use. That has been a huge factor in my success.
That is Eric Rosenberg this week on the Do It For Yourself podcast. Hey everybody, how are you doing today? I am sitting here in my office and the sun is shining through the window on my face, but it is absolutely freezing outside, as it's going to be for the rest of this week. But before we get into this week's guest and this week's episode, I wanted to share something with you. It was actually a note that I received just the other day from a previous podcast guest. So here we go. Hey, Ian, just wanted to touch base to let you know that the podcast was a great success, in my opinion. A friend of mine who was struggling with the idea of getting help for months listened to the podcast after I posted it on Facebook, and then, because of what he heard, decided it was time to get the help he needed. 3 days later, he entered into treatment. Just wanted to share that positive note with you. Have a great day. That is exactly why I do this podcast, because I want someone to hear something here on this show that invokes the change in them. And I want to share as many stories as I possibly can of successful people in whatever it is that they are successful in. It does not have to be just sport or weight loss or building a business. This was someone who had a successful story of going through treatment and becoming clean and sober, and they are now living that way for themselves because they know that is what they need to do. So it was just absolutely amazing to hear that, to read that story, and I thank Blake for sharing that so much. If you have not heard that episode, please take a minute and go back and listen to Blake's episode. It was a really, really great conversation, and I really, really enjoyed it. So this week on the show, I have for you Eric Rosenberg. And Eric, he started his career in the finance and banking industry. And as he was starting that, he kind of got into, this little thing called blogging. And he realized down the road that this little thing called blogging could potentially turn into something much, much more. And so he began writing articles for some of the larger websites and continuing on his blog. And now he actually is a full-time writer and blogger. He is creating content via podcasts and a few other avenues. So, it was great to hear somebody who had this little idea, this little side gig that they were working on. And this is now turning out to be, their full-time gig. This is their full-time thing. So who knows what's going to happen here with the Do It For Yourself podcast, but wouldn't that be something if we had a guest on here that was talking about it and, eventually one day this is what we were doing full-time. Who knows? But so I would love to share this interview with you this is my interview with Eric Rosenberg, and I hope you enjoy.
All right, man. So you ready to get going then?
I'm ready when you are.
All right, sounds good. Well, Eric, thank you so much for coming on the show this evening. I believe it's actually afternoon where you are, but I really appreciate you setting aside some time here and getting connected with me through the email there, and setting aside, like I said, just a little bit of time to jump on and come and share your story with everyone who is listening to the Do It For Yourself podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear about your journey that got you to where you are today. But do me a favor and just kind of give me a little bit of a day in the life, so to speak, of Eric and what you're up to nowadays.
Sure. So I'm primarily a freelance finance content writer. So I write for a handful of different financial companies, probably some big banks you've heard of, and other financial startups, and also different finance publications and blogs from the media industry. And that all came out of a side hustle. That's where it all started. And that came out of my own blog, which I still have. It's a blog and podcast and YouTube channel called Personal Profitability. But that actually, it's funny, I thought that was going to be the big thing that was my day-to-day. And that actually just turned out to be the resume to create a new career path I didn't even know I wanted. So typically in my days, I start out and end out doing a lot of writing. That's my number one thing. But at the same time, I'm hustling. I just launched a new coaching business to help work with people one-on-one. I'm working on a book it's actually a follow-up. I wrote a short ebook once upon a time, and I'm working on growing my speaking business as well. So there's even also a few apps under development. So I keep very busy, still side hustling. But my primary day-to-day is that freelance finance writing.
And so when you're doing this finance writing, what are some of the things that you are writing about, some of the topics you're discussing, just kind of like what are some of the things that you are publishing for these companies?
Sure, yeah. So there's a different range of things. One of the biggest, I'd say, uses of my time these days has been reviews of different banks and credit cards and investment companies and other financial products. I'm having a strong background in finance. I was actually a banker myself once upon a time. That was my first job out of college. And I picked up 2 finance degrees along the way. So I know a lot about how these financial products work, and having been on both sides of the table with all of them. So that is a big focus for me and something I'm always happy to do. I also do financial advice and analysis, helping people come up with ideas to improve their finances, maybe fixing their budgets or paying off debt or choosing the right credit card for travel hacking and taking a free trip. I actually just got back a few days ago from Israel, and I flew my dad and myself their business class round trip, and it cost less than $100 each. So that's the kind of stuff I love to share as well. So pretty much anything with a dollar sign attached. It's kind of my background.
Well, you may be getting a lot of incoming emails from triathletes because I'm sure, as you know, it's quite costly to fly all over the country and do some of these races. And if you're flying back and forth to Israel in business class for about $100, you may be getting an increase in a few emails for people to figure out how they can do that as well.
Heck yeah. I actually have a post I'm happy to share with everyone. If you Google it at Personal Profitability, it's the Complete Beginner Guide to Travel Hacking. So that one, you might want to set aside more than a couple minutes. I think it's about 5,000 or 7,000 words. That was a big one, but it'll get you started and on the right track to do what I've been doing.
Awesome. That's awesome. All right. So, as you mentioned, you were a banker there, and you said you picked up a few degrees in that industry. So where did things start from that perspective? What were you thinking about towards your end of high school career and moving towards college?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it actually, I think, goes back farther than high school for me. My grandpa was a professor of marketing at the University of Arkansas, and my aunt was a teacher, so there's always been a lot of education in my family, and having a business school grandpa, that definitely got a little bit in my blood. I remember, I think I was 8 or 10 years old when he gave me a general ledger notebook for my birthday to start keeping track of my income and my expenses. And I don't know that I ever actually filled that out, but I do remember him teaching me how it worked, and those lessons stayed with me. And in high school, I was lucky to go to this really big high school in Southeast Denver that had classes and programs for just about anything you could imagine. And we had the option to choose either those kind of fine arts classes, things like band or music or art, or I think there was even jewelry making at my high school, or you could take business classes instead. And with that business background, I was like, oh, this is fun. I like the stock market. I like business. So I took the 2 business classes my high school offered. And then I got involved in Future Business Leaders of America, or FBLA. I actually won 10th place in the state in Colorado for web design I think it was my senior year in high school. And I went to the state competition my junior year as well. So I was definitely going to business school when I finished high school. That was no question to me. But I was kind of torn between finance and marketing. I really enjoyed both. The marketing side I saw growing up. We had a family business. My family owned a video store. You can guess what happened to that. But we did have it for a while. So I saw marketing both at a small business level, and my dad had a background in marketing before that. So I knew a lot about that, but I was always kind of that math and numbers guy. So eventually the allure of things like stock markets and spreadsheets, which I know probably grosses a lot of people out, but to me that was exciting. And that's what I decided to do. So I went into finance, and that led to that first job as a bank manager when I graduated.
And so this was all kind of under your own, I guess, discretion, we'll say. Like, you were always interested in this, and it was probably a product of your environment because you were surrounded by, these things. But it was something that you knew you wanted to do. Like, you knew you wanted to go on to college and pursue something in this particular industry.
Oh, yeah. I knew I wanted to do something business related. I kind of pictured myself in a big office building, ideally at the top corner with a 7 or 8 figure paycheck, but I didn't end up going that route. We can talk about when I veered off that course in a minute. But yes, I always knew I wanted to go to college. It was kind of a given in my family that my sister and I would both go to college, and we had a little competition for a little while. My sister's a doctor now, and I kept rubbing it in her face that, because I knew she was going to be a doctor, that I was the most educated one in the family until about the hour before she got her diploma. I said, this is my last time. I'm still the most educated with the master's degree. Because I did pick up an MBA along the way. And now I have my sister, the doctor, and I'm the finance guy in the family.
Yes, but I would have to say that your schedule and your hours might be a little bit more favorable, especially when she was probably going through her residency and everything else.
Yeah, she's actually in her residency. She's a general surgery resident, and she's lucky to be at a program. They let her pause for 2 years to pick up a master's in public health, because she needed to get just one more degree on me, right? She's doing that, then goes back to that resident schedule. And I have to say, I am not jealous at all of what doctors have to go through to become doctors and then to really get their career started. It's a heck of a lot of work.
Absolutely. So speaking of work, though, you came out of college and, you got yourself job right out of college working at a bank, which probably at the time was very exciting for you. I mean, this is like you're fresh out of college, you have your first job, you're going to be making some real money, not, money that you were making in college to just kind of, foot the beer bill and everything else. So I would imagine that when you first started this job, that it was something that was probably pretty exciting for you.
Oh, definitely. I was, I came out of college with almost the exact perfect time to get a finance degree, right as the economy was falling apart in 2007 and then into 2008. So in some ways you could say I was even lucky to get that job and any finance job out of college. But I did go to a great school. I went to the University of Colorado in Boulder, and I had a great degree and a great experience there. So when I found that job at the bank, it just seemed like the right fit. I turned out actually that specific bank just didn't feel like the right cultural fit for me. I was, not thrilled with the experience working there. So I left there after about 6 months and moved on to the corporate finance and accounting world, where I lived in gray cubicle land for about a decade. And that is the time when I picked up the MBA. But it was actually right when I quit the job at the bank. I'd been blogging about Israel and the Middle East just as a hobby for a few years, and I decided, I was reading all these different personal finance blogs, and a lot of them were telling their stories of how they got into a ton of debt and were trying to get out of debt. And I started thinking, well, geez, I don't have any debt. I graduated college debt-free. I, a few months ago was approving mortgages and new credit card applications. I should be the one writing a personal finance blog. So that's how what became Personal Profitability was born. It was just seeing other people writing about money and thinking, geez, I have something unique and original I can contribute here. Hopefully I'll help people and I can share my journey as I go. And that little move right there back in October 2008, just over 10 years ago now, was what started me on this path to escape the cubicle when I didn't even know that was something I wanted to do yet.
So when you shifted and went over to the corporate world, what kind of made you make that switch? Because I'm sure that's a very different switch. I mean, when you're at the bank, you are customer facing, you're seeing people, you're interacting with customers probably almost every single day. And when you go to the cubicle farm, so to speak, you don't have that interaction. So was there a draw to go into the corporate world versus being in the, banking industry where you have more interactions with customers?
Yeah, I actually liked the kind of corporate environment more than the retail environment. Part of it, and part of why I honestly didn't love working at the bank, was the hours we had to be open. We talk about bankers' hours, from the 1970s and 1980s, they had some pretty cushy hours. But these days, I was in typically 7 to 7, 5 days a week. So I was working very long hours in that bank because I was the one who had to be there to unlock the door when the drive-thru was open for our tellers to get there to open up in the morning before the regular branch opened. And I was the one who locked the door at the end of the day, 5 days a week. So, and then we were talking about adding Saturdays on as well. So it was definitely a tough schedule to be a manager in that banking environment. And that was something that wasn't as appealing to me. But in the corporate world, being a salaried worker, just the same in either position, my hours looked a lot different and they were more flexible. That was something I enjoyed. I enjoyed working with other professionals, trying to work together towards a common goal. Not that I wasn't doing that at the bank, but that was primarily all I did in the cubicle type jobs. And I just kind of enjoyed the work a little bit differently. I did like working with customers. That was my favorite part of being at the bank. But when I moved into the corporate world, I appreciated that things could be more merit focused, or at least it's supposed to be in the corporate world. It isn't always as much as they say it is. But I knew if I worked hard and did well, I would move up. And that is exactly what happened. I did move up very quickly from an introductory financial analyst 1 to a senior accountant, and then on into treasury and other different roles throughout the next, as I said, about 10 years.
So that had to be a very exciting time for you. I mean, you're working hard. You're getting to see kind of the results of your hard work paying off right in front of you. You're really moving up, and you have this blog that you're doing. And when were you doing the blog? Were you just doing this, nights and weekends, and kind of when a topic would come to you, you would write about it, or was there, maybe a little bit more structure than that?
So in the beginning, it was definitely when the idea came to me, write about it. But I was actually read some great books, including, I think the first one that really started getting my brain turning about how to run a blog was Pro Blogger, the book by Darren Rouse, which it's actually a little dated now, but I would still say it's worth reading if you want to have a successful blog or any kind of online brand where you're putting out new content regularly. So that was hugely helpful for me. Then the thing that really gave me, those hockey stick growth moments where I had the biggest, explosions of growth, if you want to say that, would be when I got involved in different communities that I could learn a lot from and were mutually supportive. So one that really got me started is called the Yakezi, and it's run by Sam from Financial Samurai. He's an awesome guy. Been friends with him, geez, about a decade now, since that's how old my blog is. But he created a community of about 100 finance bloggers. It's not quite as active as it used to be, but in the early days, I learned so much about online advertising and traffic growth strategies and SEO and all these topics that they don't teach you in business school, that you just need to run a blog if you want to do so successfully. And yeah, I never thought I'd get rich on it, but I hoped I would, and I figured I'd make at least a few bucks. And through sponsorships and ads early on, I remember the first time I got a $10 ad, I was so excited. And I wouldn't take any ad like that ever these days, but that first $10 ad, I was like, wow, I could go buy a beer with what I made on the internet today. And that's like real beer you can taste. And growing up in Colorado, that's craft beer land. So that was so cool to me that I was able to do that. And the Yaquezi really taught me how to monetize that hobby. And I remember reading that this one guy, who's now a very good friend of mine, but I'd never really heard of him at that point, named PT, or Philip Taylor. He has a site called PT Money Blog, was putting together a first ever financial blogger conference. And today that's known as FinCon, and I've been to every single one. And that is where I learned how to turn this money-making hobby into a business. And that's through those communities is where I started to pick up those first freelance clients. And I said to myself, if I make enough money online to pay for that first trip to FinCon, which was in 2011, I was going to do it. And I'm so glad I did, because it was another huge pivotal moment for me in the growth of my business that led to where I am today.
So when you got that first ad, that first $10 ad, how did you get that ad? Like, did they reach out to you? Did you have, other banner ads that were already on there? What did that whole process look like? And how did you go about acquiring people to, pay you in order to advertise on your blog?
Yeah, sure. So that one, they actually reached out to me, and it was a British SEO agency that I was working with on behalf of one of their clients. I'd write about a topic they might provide, and then they'd pay me the $10, and I'd have to link to their product in that article I wrote. Which now Google definitely frowns on that, so don't do that today. I'm not recommending you do it. But back then, there weren't any furry pea animals yet. Google Panda and Penguin had not happened yet. So it was all about just get links, get links, get links. That was pretty much all SEO was. So if you were open for business to create high quality articles that link to things, companies were willing to pay for it. Even if they weren't so high quality, they were willing to pay. So that's kind of how it all worked in the beginning. But that whole industry's changed, how that all works. But what was interesting, if you're familiar with like Smart Passive Income from Pat Flynn, I actually met Pat at that very first FinCon, and we've become friends over the years. But I always saw his site growing and growing, and he also has done income reports. I think he stopped those since. But I saw his site growing, and I was like, oh, this is exactly what I'm going to do with personal profitability. I'm going to turn it into this giant brand and make 6 figures a month, and it's going to be amazing, and I'm going to sail into the sunset and live happily ever after. But Google had different plans for me, and I noticed that even though I thought it was going to be the blog and then eventually the podcast that were going to grow to this giant level, it was actually the freelancing that was growing in terms of revenue. And having that accounting and finance background helped me notice that I've always kept really good financial records. I've actually have friends who are accountants who've made fun of me because my records are so detailed. But that is where I learn about how my business is going. And I was in financial planning and analysis for the last, I'd say, half of my cubicle career. So, over about 5-6 years in different FP&A type roles. So looking at the numbers and trying to pull a story out that I can lead to success in a business, that's what I am trained to do. So I saw that happening in my business, and I was making way more from the freelancing than the blog part. So I started to shift my efforts that way. And that's where I really started to see the online revenue growth. And again, I was just doing this on evenings and weekends, often 10 to 20 hours a week-ish. And in 2015, I did $40,000 on the side that year. And I thought, wow, that's what the average person, I was living in Portland at that point. I thought, wow, this is what the average person in Portland makes in a year. If I can do that in 10 to 20 hours a week, imagine what I could do if I did this full time. So in 2016, like a good responsible dad with a stay-at-home mom wife and a new 6-month-old daughter at home, I quit my job and sold my house and moved to the most expensive part of the country. And here I am in California.
So when you go, I just want to step back for 1 second and talk about your freelance work that you do. So when you are doing freelance work, what exactly are you doing? You're writing articles, and those articles are being published on other people's websites, right? It's not being published on your personal blog. You are writing the content, and is your name still going at the bottom of the article when it is published on their website? Like, how does that all work?
Sure, yeah. So there's a lot of it depends in there. Yes and no to everything you just said.
Okay.
For the most part, I'm writing to go on business websites. Like if you Google there's actually a bunch of Eric Rosenberg. So if you Google my name in quotation marks, and then write like finance or any financial related topic, you're probably going to find a whole lot of articles out there. I write for sites like Business Insider, is probably the one most people have heard of, and The Balance. And then there's also, financial companies like investment banks and credit card companies. And many of those, I get my own name on it. That's called a byline in the journalism industry, which I don't have a journalism background. So anything related to that, I've kind of had to pick up just as I've gone because I wasn't trained in it. So I've learned about things like bylines. And on most of what I write, I do get that byline where it says right under the title by Eric Rosenberg. And then at the bottom, maybe a little bio. But then there's some companies I'll write for. Like I just did a series of articles for a large investment bank targeted towards high net worth investors about how to profit with a sustainable portfolio. And that doesn't have anyone's name on it. It's just going to say, this content comes from this company. So things that don't have my name, I'll typically get a higher rate than things that do have my name, because those things that do have my name might lead to more opportunities and more business and more clients, and the publishers know that. But on the same other hand, they want the best quality content, and if you work with really high quality companies, it really becomes a win-win. And I feel like I have this kind of dream job where I get to work at home. I get to control my schedule. I don't have to ask anyone for vacation time if I want to, jet off across the world or anything like that. But I do have, about a dozen bosses at any given time also. It's nice I don't have to rely on any one specific company. If I want to let one go, that's okay. And sometimes I finish up a project and a company moves on, and that's okay. I'm always working on finding new clients. And as I do that, I'm always trying to find, the best possible client I can work with. And at the beginning of my time writing, I could charge maybe, $25 and then $50 an article, which for a brand new writer, I was totally okay with that, because that was a lot of beers when I could write 5 or 10 of those a week. I could, at $50 an article, that added up to, it was all my bar tabs and then my mortgage and my rent, or rent and then mortgage, different order. But it was a growing source of income. And then when I hit those, different hockey stick moments and really started to grow, it came from writing more. So when I quit the job and could spend more time writing, that obviously led to higher income from writing, but also by having a better portfolio and showing that I will always put forth that best quality content possible, I'm able to get better and bigger clients. And typically, bigger companies have deeper pockets. So when I was writing for an individual blogger, perhaps someone's small blog, they didn't have that big of a budget because they had a relatively small site. But when you're working with a multinational investment bank, they have a few more dollars to work with, so they can invest in that super high quality content. And by positioning myself as an expert in those specific areas, things like investing and credit cards and banking, I'm able to stand out from other writers and get those best quality jobs.
So now we'll fast forward back to when you left this job, and when you started thinking about leaving, was there a number in your head that you knew you needed to make in order for this to work?
I didn't have a clear number like that, but it was that year that I hit the 40,000 when I was like, wow, I might really be able to do this. I'd always kind of thought about it a little bit in the back of my head of, oh, this would be so cool if I could grow it to a point that it would be my only income and my primary job. But I never really took it seriously until that $40,000 a year. So that was kind of the tipping point for me in thinking about it like that.
Now, and you don't have to disclose, even percentages or anything like that, but I would have to imagine that after building your career for 10 years, $40,000 was probably, I would have to say, not too close to what you were making working in the industry for that long.
I keep muting. If you might edit this part out, I keep muting my microphone because the dogs are barking because the UPS truck just came.
That's all right. That's all right.
Yeah,
it's the Christmas season. We know how that goes.
Yeah, I'm like, do I just kick them out in the backyard? Sorry. So, could you say the last part of that question again, so I can refocus?
Sure. So, I said you don't have to disclose your salary or percentages or anything like that. But I would have to imagine that when your blog hit that $40,000 in 1 year, after working in the banking industry and the corporate world for 10 plus years and building up your career there, I would have to say that $40,000 per year was probably a little bit less than what you were making in the banking industry. So at that time, especially with a 6-month-old and a stay-at-home wife, I would have to still imagine that was, a difficult decision to make.
Yes. Yeah. So I was making significantly more in my corporate job than I was online at $40,000 a year.
That was my assumption. Yeah. I mean, like I said, you don't have to disclose that, but I mean, I live, in Wilmington, Delaware, and we have, some of the biggest banks that are, have corporate offices here. And I've seen some of these corporate world bankers.
I'll say I wasn't quite at 6 figures, but I was getting close, and it was within sight, within probably the next few years of my career, if I'd stayed on that career path. Mm-hmm. And also, you have to remember in those corporate jobs, especially when you're at a good, solid company. I was at a good financial company, and I only have good things to say about it. It was a great place to work. But I also had, great health insurance there, and the company paid for a large portion of it. Now my health insurance, with this year's increase, I'm on the exchanges, and whatever people think about politics, some decisions happened in Washington this year that made my costs go up again. So now it's higher than my mortgage. And I live in California, so just let that settle in for a minute, that my health insurance is more than my mortgage here. But that's a huge expense that you have to pay for. If you don't have an employer, you're paying for all of it. You have all these other costs and things to think about outside of your salary. But I had to keep leaning back on, if I could do 40,000 in that 10 to 20 hours, if I double it, I should be able to do at least double. And that was going to, kind of get me back on track to catch up to where my corporate salary was. And if you look at the income reports that I've had for the last few months, I'm doing way, way better than I used to do in the corporate world. But it took time to get there. It took some strategic decisions along the way. It was not an overnight success. I sometimes joke that it was 8.5 years of doing this blogging thing, and then I was the overnight success. So it definitely took putting in my hours and building that business on the side. But once I dove in and really went for it, it took a few months, but it eventually started to blossom into what I hoped it could be.
Now, why the move? Why the move over to California, like one of the most expensive states to live in here in the United States?
Because I hate my money. No, I'm kidding. The real reason is my in-laws live about a half hour from me. My wife grew up in Santa Barbara, which at this point, we'd been living in Portland. I grew up in Denver. My wife and I met in Denver. I wanted an adventure. That's when we moved up to Portland, and I got a big raise, actually 40% raise when we moved to Portland. So I did well with that move.
Yeah.
Then when it was time we had a baby there, decided to live by family again, and it was either go back to Denver. And I just really hate scraping the ice off of cars in the winter. That's something I just don't ever want to do ever again in my life. And I've done it a lot of times. So the beach was definitely the more tempting place to go. And I don't regret it. It is a lot more expensive here. I call it the sunshine tax because it's almost the end of December when we're recording this. And I was just in a t-shirt and jeans today. And I don't need my heavy coats that I used to wear. So I love that. I love a lot of the lifestyle you get out in California. So for me, that was a worthwhile move, but yeah, it is expensive. And every once in a while I do the math and say to my wife, we could move 5 hours away to Las Vegas where there's no state income tax in Nevada and property taxes are lower and I figured out how much money we'd save, but then I'd have to live in Nevada and I couldn't live here. So I stay.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's scorpions out there. I don't get it. Why do people live in the desert when there's scorpions? It baffles me.
I don't know. I mean, like I said, I'm in Wilmington, Delaware, so
no scorpions up there.
No, we don't have any scorpions, but we do have ice to scrape.
Yeah.
We've actually been very lucky. We got hit with one snowstorm. But it was back in November before Thanksgiving even. And it's been very, very mild so far this year. It's probably because I just went and bought a new set of skis back in October, so we probably won't get any snow. So I did want to ask you, when you left your personal, not your personal, but you left your banking job, you started the personal blog full time. What was something that you quit doing that enabled your success or enabled you to be more successful with the personal blog and the finance blog?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that I really quit that helped both my wallet and my business was cable TV. And it's really easy to pick on cable as a personal finance blogger because it costs a lot and all it contributes to you doing is sitting on the couch. So when I cut that cable, it saved me $70 a month, which I've done the math, finance guy. And over the years since I cut that cable in 2011, I've saved, I think, over $6,000 now, which, if I was paying full price airline tickets, that'd be a few trips to Europe and back. So that was a huge benefit. It also, at that point, added to both the time I was spending on my business, those evenings and weekends. I spent less time watching movie marathons on TNT or whatever channel and Law and Order marathons and those kinds of things, and focused more working on the blog and working on building my business. It also led to me being more social and going out with humans more, rather than staring at TV screens, which I also think is probably a good thing. So it was all around a great decision in my life to get rid of cable. And it just feels weird to ever think about getting that back because it has led to such a great thing and you could just get so little out of it.
Yeah, that's something that's, it's interesting that you bring that up because I feel like a lot of people are going that way now and they're getting rid of cable, but it's kind of like they're getting rid of cable and they're replacing it with something else. So you get rid of cable, but you have Hulu Live on your, Roku TV.
I just have, we got Hulu just recently I got it for the first time in like 7 years because it was 99 cents a month. And I can't stand it because there's commercials. So we really just watch Netflix. And having two young kids, I have two little girls now, a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. And I have so much time focused on them that the last 90 minutes of the day, my wife and I might throw on a show as we're getting ready for bed. But TV has just become less of a focus in my life. And I mean, I know some people, I know a lot of athletes listen to this, but watching professional sports to me is like dreadfully boring. Unless the Broncos are in the Super Bowl or the Rockies are in the World Series, I'm probably not going to watch. And, there's the outcome of a bunch of men chasing a ball around on a field doesn't have any effect on my happiness, and it doesn't need to. So really think about where you put your time and where you want it to go, and if that gives you what you want out of it. There are some people who just love their teams so much that that's their thing. And that's okay if that's your thing. You just have to think, where am I going to get other time to work on whatever I want to work on? It's the same as a budget. I always tell people the exact same thing with your money. If you want that cable, that's fine. But maybe that means you cut going to Starbucks, Or maybe you want that coffee every day, but that means you get a used car instead of a new car. And there's all these decisions we have to make all the time with our time and our money. They're both limited resources. So to get the best use of it, never use the term "I'm killing time" or "I'm wasting time." Use your time. Put it to good use. That has been a huge factor in my success.
And so, after you quit this job, you said it took you a couple months and you kind of got back on the road, but I would have to imagine that it probably wasn't just a couple months and like these big companies come knocking and they're like, "Hey, Eric, how's it going? We saw your, your blog out there. Hey, could you come write for us?" Like, was there a time period and, was there maybe one article that brought in 1 to 2 of these big companies?
It was actually I set up the net before I quit the job. So I already had a handful of good clients. And that's, as you can see from that $40,000 the year before. So I knew I could make probably $5,000 a month if I really put the hustle in with the existing clients I had. And then by just adding 1 or 2 more, I could get to a pretty reasonable income that wasn't, going to be comparable to what I had as a finance professional, but it was putting me on the right track. One thing that I did that was a big change, I'd say about 3 months after I left the job, I had been doing both freelance writing and freelance website development. So I was building WordPress sites and themes and helping small businesses build sites or, redesign and rebuild sites or upgrade from, old HTML into a better platform. So there were a whole bunch of website things I was doing that was making up. I actually looked at my books and, being the bookkeeper that I am, it was about 15% to 20% of my income coming there, and 76% was coming from writing. But at the same time, I realized about a month after I left the job that the website work was taking about, 80-ish% of my time and giving me about 90% of my stress. And if you're running some numbers really quick in your head, that probably sounds like the 80-20 rule to you. It pretty much smacked me in the face and said, "Eric, follow the Pareto principle. Stop doing this website work because it's costing you all of this time and leading to only 20% of your results." So when I quit that, it was over the next 3 months, my income roughly tripled from around $4,500 a month to the over $10,000 a month range. That was back in, I think, April, May, June. Doing a little math in my head right now as I'm talking. The fall of 2016 was the first time that I hit that 10,000 a month point, and it's been great.
So, I mean, I would imagine that it's been, probably just a little bit more than great. But I was going to say, you're a numbers guy, so you could see those numbers, and that was something that was easy for you to kind of come to the realization on. But for people who aren't numbers guys or gals, what is something else that would throw up a red flag in a situation like that? Like if you were trying to explain this to somebody who is one of your clients, you're speaking to them about money or, anything, they aren't the numbers guy or gal. They're coming to you because you are that numbers person. What is like a red flag that you can say to them to kind of have that light bulb moment? Like, "Hey, can't you see this?"
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, I'd say it wasn't even that easy for me, even when I did realize it, because I was thinking, wow, I'm working so hard on this website development business. It should be growing. But then I was looking at where my time was going, and it was really just my time growing, not the income as much as I expected. It was scaling opposite to the writing business. So part of it was just I would tell people to take a step back and look at everything that you're doing in your business and pick out what's working and what is not working. Because it's not always as clear as an 80-20 rule, but there's usually something that's working better than anything else in your business. And even if it's not what you're expecting to work, even if it's not your becoming Pat Flynn moment, it's your becoming a freelancer moment, as it was for me, I had to recognize that's what was working. And it was just the same thing happening again down the road. It was, am I going to be a freelance writer or a freelance website developer? And part of why I love to side hustle is I have that kind of ADD personality. I always want to be starting new things, and I always want to be testing and trying. But it also means I could get distracted really easily. And I'm in a couple mastermind groups, and the guys who've known me a really long time would say probably my biggest weakness is that I get distracted by shiny new objects, shiny new business ideas. So by focusing down on what really works, that's been able to help lead to the greatest income growth. And it also gives me more freedom to have fun with those side hustles and those side projects, because I am having enough success elsewhere. I don't need the side hustle now. The side hustle became the main hustle, so I can re-side hustle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. So what do you think the number one tool for your success has been?
I lean back. I don't know if I could say one specific tool.
Give me a couple.
I'd point to a few things. I'd say my education has been huge. I wouldn't be able to write about finance the way I can if I didn't have 2 finance degrees. So again, it was one of those things. It wasn't what I expected to do with my 2 finance degrees. I always thought I'd want to be that Fortune 500 CEO, and I ended up using my finance degrees for something else. But if you have an expertise in something, maybe it's triathlons, maybe it's a certain type of software coding, maybe you're a Ruby on Rails guy or gal. Maybe you have a super obsession with camping, and you go every single weekend, and you've tried every kind of tent and sleeping bag and trekking pole and camping stove out there. There's something a lot about that other people would want to know about. So by recognizing what that was for me and how I could turn that into a business, that was a huge part of it. Also, staying organized and having good communication and getting really active in the communities that I wanted to be a part of. They say, I think Tim Ferriss has said it, but a lot of other people have said it too, that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Think really hard about who those people are, and are they people that you want to be more like or be less like? There have been times I've distanced myself from certain people because I didn't think they were a positive influence in my life. And that's hard to distance yourself from a friend sometime. But if they're toxic or if they're dragging you down, you're better off without them. And then go seek out those relationships and those communities that will help you reach the next level. No one ever told me start going to startup events in Denver. I just started going, even though I had a corporate job. So a lot of those startup people are like, why is this corporate guy here? Well, I learned a lot from those events. I became friends with a lot of those people, and that helped me turn my life into a startup. It turned me into a business. So you never know what might come out through doors that will open along the way, but you have to get started on the path to go find those doors. And I'd start by, I'd say if you want to call it a tool, look at the communities around you and find places that you want to be a part of and you can contribute and learn, and that will lead to a lot of great growth.
And I think just to kind of spin off of that as well, it's, like taking chances, taking those first steps. You don't know where that road is going to lead you, and maybe it doesn't lead anywhere, maybe it does, but, you would never know if you hadn't gone to some of these things that you've gone to and built some of these relationships that you've built, and, even just had that first conversation with some of these people. So I think it's, it's taking those chances and taking those first steps, and you might find out that you don't like it, and that's okay. But guess what? You still grow as a person when you find out that you don't like something. But, to sit there and, I guess say, oh, no, I don't like that, or no, that's not what I want to do, without taking that chance, I think that's, I think it's something important.
Yeah, hey, it turned out I didn't like that job in the bank, but that experience is still useful to me today, more than 10 years later.
Right, and you would have never known that you didn't like that experience at the bank had you not taken this step and kind of gone outside of your comfort zone, so to speak.
Yeah, I thought I was going to be Gordon Gekko, when I got that job.
So now that you have, had success with the blog and the writing, and even with the success of your blog, a written blog is kind of transitioning now, and it's going, a lot more towards video content, and voice is really, really big right now, especially with I won't say the name because it's sitting on my desk right next to me, but mine happens to be white and it's made by Amazon. Like, voice is really, really big right now. So what kind of kept you motivated during the times of change and helped you really pivot?
I think part of it's I've always just been curious about technology and the next big thing. I have a little thing next to my desk that's made by Google, and I have one of those in just about every room in my house. A lot of people probably think that's creepy, but I'm always trying to get excited about whatever the next big thing is. And also, again, leaning back to those conferences and those relationships and those communities, you can see the trends emerging before they become the next big thing. Like I could joke I was blogging before it was cool, but getting involved in that blogging community, I started to see these new things called podcasts. And I actually started my first podcast, I think in 2003 or 2004. I started a DJ podcast because I was into Tiesto and Hardwell and all those electronic dance music DJs. I was like, oh, I could do this. So I learned how to put a podcast together, and it started to work. And I decided, being a DJ wasn't going to be my future, but that experience eventually led to the Personal Profitability podcast and being around those other podcasters. And then, still going to I started going to Podcast Movement and still going to FinCon and Podcast Movement, another conference. You start seeing people walking around videoing and doing video interviews and all these things. You can see those trends starting to emerge by keeping your finger on the pulse. Again, it's going to those communities and those places that are doing what you want to do and learning from them, because that's where you're always going to see the next exciting thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, so for my, my last question here, I want you to kind of think back to that point where, you realized that you had made $40,000 in 1 year, but you also knew that you had a stay-at-home wife and a 6-month-old at home. And I want you to think back to that time and kind of think about some of the things that were kind of going through your head during that time, and maybe some of the excuses that would have or could have prevented you from making this leap. Because the point of this podcast for me is I want to motivate someone who is sitting on the sidelines and considering making a jump just as you were, but they are allowing the excuses to win, and they are allowing the reasons why they can't, air quotes, can't do it, win. So thinking back to that time and putting yourself in those shoes again, what is something that you could say to someone who is allowing the excuses of why they can't do this to take this leap? And it doesn't necessarily have to be take a leap to do a blog or do a triathlon or run a 5K. It could be for anything that they want to do it, but they are allowing these excuses to win.
Sure, yeah. I have a few good answers for that one. So I'd start it with a great quote in the book, The Art of Nonconformity by Chris Guillebeau. He says that to have a real big life change, either your current situation has to be so bad that you want to get out of it, or the opportunity has to be so great that you're willing to give up the current situation to have it. I'm guessing most of the people listening to this show aren't in such a terrible life situation that they are willing to do almost anything to escape. So you have to focus on that opportunity. What is it that is so great that's going to make you take action? Something I've said to friends who have kind of started the entrepreneurial journey but keep getting stuck is don't let perfection get in the way of progress. A lot of us are perfectionists, but if you want everything to be so perfect all the time, you'll never really just get started. So you have to really get started. And the last thing I would say that was really going through my head, the big kind of tipping point factor, was I realized it is never easier to make a major change or do a big thing in your life than it is right now. because think about what your future looks like. I thought about leaving my job at one point, or I thought about quitting the job one time early in my 20s, but I had all the excuses and things. But looking back, I wasn't married. I didn't have any kids. I didn't have any mortgages. I had minimal student loans for my MBA. That would have been a really easy time to make a big life change, but I didn't do it. And then there was another point I almost made a big life change and I didn't. And you can look back at all those times in your life where you almost did something but didn't quite do it. And if you think forward, it's only ever going to get harder. There will be more kids or more commitments or more responsibilities or more mortgages or more, obligations for your paycheck. Whatever is going to happen in the future, things rarely get easier. We don't win the Powerball. That's why it gets in the news when people do it. That's not a retirement plan. I often remind people. So you have to think, is this the moment? And when would it ever be easier? And it won't be. You just have to go for it.
Yeah, the best time to start was yesterday, and the next best time is right now. That's another great quote that I like. But I mean, I completely agree with you there. So I think that's a great place to wrap it up. And I just want to say, thank you again so much for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time to, hang out and share your story. And it's something that I really enjoyed. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And if it's all right, I'd love to offer the listeners a freebie. I created a free week-long personal profitability bootcamp. If you go to personalprofitability.com/bootcamp, you can just enter your email and you will get a video every morning for a week helping you get on a path to personal profitability.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I will make sure to get that link from you so that I can put it into the show notes, and I'll also include it in some of the, the posts and stuff that I put out surrounding the podcast. So, like I said, I'll grab that link from you, and I'll make sure to include that as well. That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been my pleasure to be here, and great to chat with you and all the listeners.
That is my interview with Eric Rosenberg. And I think the craziest part for me was when Eric said that he was going to take this on full time with a little baby and a wife at home, and they were then moving to California. Like, I just can't imagine, providing for a wife and a child, and then at the same time in California, where the cost of living is probably one of the highest, if not the highest, in the country. So it's just a testament to how much Eric really believed in this dream that he was chasing. And those are the kind of stories that I want to share here on the podcast. So I just want to say thank you guys so much for tuning in to this week's episode. I really enjoyed hanging out with you and sharing this story. If you enjoyed the story and you enjoyed hanging out with us, and you would like to support what we are doing here on the podcast, there's a few ways that you can do that. And, the top two are just to share this show with a friend and somebody who you think is going to enjoy it. And also leave a rating and review on the Apple Podcast app or wherever it is that you are tuning into this podcast. If you would like to help out financially, we do have a Patreon page set up. That is patreon.com/doitforyourself. And there you can make a small donation that is going to help out with bandwidth and storage and booking of guests and everything like that. So thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I look forward to sharing another amazing story with you next week.